Hello, and welcome to our very first ever Redaction Report debate. We're hoping to make these a regular fixture, actually. So if you're interested in us debating a particular topic, please get in touch and we'll see if we can sort that out. So keep an eye on our content as it comes up. Follow us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, we're on the full works. Click the bell below, subscribe, and you'll be able to keep in touch with all the future debates and podcasts we have planned. But today, we're getting started with one of the big topics of the day. Should the UK rejoin the EU? That's our motion for the day. Should the UK rejoin the EU? So, of course, some background. The UK voted to leave the EU in 2016, and later, after several years of fraught negotiations with the EU and the UK and some bitter divisions in the country, the UK finally left in January 2020 and formally ended its relationship with the EU after a transition period at the end of that year. Of course, the vote to leave the EU was extremely close. It was just 52-48. Some say it left the country very, very bitterly divided. And, well, we'll be addressing those divisions today, I'm sure. Of course, many people on the Remain side haven't remained quiet after then. There have been calls for a second referendum ever since the first referendum. Should there be a vote on the final deal, for example, was one of the questions posed. And of course, now some people are calling for the UK to rejoin the EU. And this is, of course, our question of the day. So I'm joined, arguing in favour, by the Rejoin EU Party leader, Richard Hewison. He recently stood for London Mayor in the poll that recently passed earlier this year, came 8th place out of 20. Of course, Sadiq Khan was eventually re-elected there, but the Rejoin EU Party has also contested some by-elections, including those in Chesham and Amersham and in Batley and Spen. And I'm also joined, arguing against, by redaction journalist Declan Carey. He's written for us over the years, and I'm sure everyone who's followed our content and our podcast in the past will be familiar with Declan. Thanks for joining.
Thanks very much for having us.
Yeah. So here's how the format of this is vaguely going to work. So each side will have 10 minutes for an opening statement. I'll be keeping time, and I'll jump in at that point if you're running slightly too close. This will be followed by a moderated discussion of around 20 minutes. And after that, there will be a Q&A. There have been some questions submitted from our viewers, but we'll see, first of all, how much time we have and whether those questions have already been addressed. I did a coin toss before you both came on. Assigned sides, and I can reveal that Richard is going to be opening proceedings today. So, Richard, 10 minutes on the clock. Right. Your opening statement, please.
Thank you very much, James. So, why should we rejoin the EU? Well, let's start at the top and let's just set aside our previous relationship with the EU and just ask ourselves what the role of the nation state should be in the 21st century. Now, I would argue the major problems we face in our lives are not fundamentally local or even regional in nature. They are global. Our lives are run by corporations organised at a global level. Our day-to-day existence is dominated by a global pandemic. Our planet is being ravaged by global environmental crises, from floods in China to wildfires raging out of control in the Americas and Russia. To suggest that we can hide in our safe little island and ignore these forces is at best optimistic and I think possibly quite naive. So how should we act? Ideally, global problems call for global solutions. But there are no competent global organisations capable of tackling these issues, so we need to form alliances. Now, whether we like it or not, there are only 4 powers large enough to have a material socio-political impact on our planet's future: China, Russia, the US, and the EU. And not surprisingly, my view is the EU is the most promising partner of these 4. So what does the EU offer that other alliances would not? Well, for me, the respect for human rights is one of the most important issues. Historically, the UK has been at the forefront of phrasing EU moves on this, and the Human Rights Act in this country, now under threat by a liberty-hating Home Secretary, was its embodiment. The guarantee of respect for EU citizens' basic freedoms in 16 key areas across 54 specific articles, as well as actively speaking out on violations in other parts of the world, to me, is one of the EU's greatest facets. Then there's respect for democracy. Being a member of the EU, a country is forced to put in place systems, safeguards, and basic hygiene checks on its own democratic systems. Now, at a time that journalists are being threatened with 14 years in jail for criticising ministers, government party officials are being hoisted to the top of allegedly free news organisations, and ordinary citizens may soon face jail just for the act of protesting, these safeguards can't come back soon enough. Then there's respect for personal freedom. Being able to freely decide on which of Europe's 100,000 odd villages, tens of thousands of towns, or 93 world-class cities you want to base your life, work and family in is a fundamental birthright that we've now been robbed of. And perhaps even more importantly, it's being part of the world's biggest peace project. The EU has effectively brought a golden age of safety to a continent that has 2,500-year history of almost non-stop war. And having seen how quick the UK was to dispatch heavily armed naval vehicles to a small fishing dispute, I think it should focus our minds on how fragile peace in our local area really is. And then for our young people, there's an outstanding range of educational opportunities via the Erasmus scheme. Now, I've spoken to many people in their 20s and 30s over the last few months' debates who've recalled vividly to me what they gained from those educational experiences, going to organisations that are global leaders in their area of discussion in order to study. And I have to say, I do find it sad that there's not that many of them prepared to fight for our current children to have exactly the same access. Now, you might be surprised why I've not mentioned so far the economic benefits of being part of the single market and the customs union. But frankly, I see this as low-hanging fruit now. Anyone who cannot see the impact Brexit has had on the decimation of our fishing industry, the limitation of music and arts, the worries for the future of British agriculture and farming with crops lying unpicked in the fields, extra costs on our import goods, empty supermarket shelves, and more than $1 trillion lost in financial assets built up over hundreds of years. Now, no matter what your view on rejoining the EU, if you cannot acknowledge that those are problems that we are currently facing, then I think this lack of intellectual curiosity undermines our fundamental ability to have debate as a democratic society. So what is the roadmap back? Well, when this incompetent, ruthless and corrupt government eventually collapses, the next administration must move immediately to activate Article 49 discussions. Now, this is not hard. They simply notify the EU Commission of intention and the bilateral dialogue phase will commence. Now, there will be a long road between this crucial step and eventually rejoining, which is why it's essential to take the first step as soon as practically possible. What will happen then? Well, the UK negotiating team will agree with the Commission on terms, preconditions and compromises necessary for our reaccession. And then finally, we as a nation will be able to have an informed debate on what's on offer. This time, much more aware of the need to combat lies, disinformation, and the almost open information warfare conducted by states that don't have the UK's best interests in mind. Now, to forecast what will come out of those discussions at this stage is pure mystic megging of a nature I'm more than happy to engage in, but I don't think is particularly helpful. And indeed, I'm sure quite a lot of mystic megging will happen in the course of the next hour as we start to talk about what the future relationship will be. Will it be hard? Yes. Will it be long? Yes. Will there be bitter and rancorous debates? Yes, yes, yes. But without it, what remains of the UK after the next few years is doomed to drift as a rudderless political entity without significant role or purpose in the global 21st century society. That's all I want to say to open. Thank you very much for listening, and over to you, Declan.
Excellent. Okay. I can't quite hear you, James.
Beg your pardon. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Okay, yeah, kept it to 6 minutes there, so not bad at all. Declan, over to you then for your opening statement, arguing against the UK rejoining the EU. 10 minutes on the clock. Over to you.
Thanks, James. So I want to start by talking about some of the fundamental values of the UK and the country, because the Brexit vote, whatever side you were on, tapped into those values and still continues to do so. Our constitution, although it is unwritten, places a lot of emphasis on the idea of democracy, the fact that everybody in the country should be allowed to have a voice, the fact that your voice matters, no matter whether it's the right opinion, the wrong opinion. Your voice should count, your voice should have some value to it, and everyone should be able to take part in the democratic principles of the country. This is something which takes part in our democracy, our society, it's in our court systems, it's everywhere in the country, and we all appreciate and value that. The reason I want to mention this in the Brexit debate is because for so many people, those values came to the forefront during that vote. That vote was a time for them to say how they really felt. It was a vote for them to not always to vote Labour or Conservative or Liberal Democrat or any of the other parties which have, quite frankly, dominated politics in this country for hundreds of years. But it was a chance for them to show that they're not happy with how things are. It was a chance for them to stand up to an establishment which was telling them to vote to remain in the EU. It was someone that was telling them that, all the benefits of the EU, and they stood up against that and they decided not to. Now, obviously, we have different opinions on it. The country is bitterly split over whether that was the right thing to do or not. It has been since 2016 and way before then as well. It's not a new issue. It's an issue that's been around for several years. But taking that vote away from those people to only a few years after the referendum to then say that we should now reverse that and rejoin the EU would let down all of those values, the value of democracy, the value of having that voice, and also all of the people who turned out to make that vote. It's certainly a conversation I believe that we could have one day in the future, but now just isn't the right time. We need to now go ahead with that. We're out of the EU. That's how the country voted. We can't turn our back on those people. I genuinely think it would have devastating consequences to people in communities across the country to then now try to rejoin the EU. It's just not the right time. Looking at some of the areas that voted to leave the EU, some of the most interesting patterns are that some of the most deprived areas were some of the places that voted most heavily to leave the EU. One of those examples is the city of Stoke-on-Trent. This is in the Midlands in the UK. It voted 69.4% to leave. It's a city that was left behind by a government which was urging them to remain. It's a city which had been forgotten. It's a city which recently returned a Conservative MP, and it's a city which really, frankly, didn't see any of the benefits of EU membership. Some of those people who voted just had no opportunities in the EU. As much as Richard mentioned that we had access to all those countries that to live and work there, for some of the poorest people in Britain, those opportunities just weren't there. The EU was something which benefited predominantly people who are middle class, people who could afford to travel, people who could afford to live in other countries. Most people, who are living in places like Stoke-on-Trent just couldn't do that. Maybe they had the ease of access of travel to visit those countries, but to live there, it was just something which was extremely difficult. And that's right across the country. That's not just in Stoke-on-Trent. So the fact that the idea that the EU was something which everyone could somehow be involved in, I don't buy. I think it's something which was never hyper-local enough to reach out to communities like Stoke-on-Trent, communities in the north of England where people needed that support. And when the government at the time urged people to vote to stay in the EU, I'm not surprised that they didn't, quite frankly. The EU had many failings, and I'm sure Richard would admit to that too, that it was never a perfect system. It was confusing. Very few people understood how it was run. I think we'd be hard pressed between us to really dig deep and uncover that today. How the EU is structured. I think if you asked, your average person on the street, very few people would have an idea. that's one of the things that makes it inaccessible to most people. And we're always saying that in politics, we want it to be more accessible. We want our politicians to be on the streets talking to people. We want them to be responding to the issues that matter to us. The EU never did that. It was a global project, as Richard explained. It was something which was a geopolitical force. But how good is that if it can't respond to the needs of people who desperately need that, who are living on the streets of Britain? Many of them who did need that and were utterly let down, in my opinion. So the idea that we're going to, just happily rejoin something like that and just continue as it was, I just don't think is the right answer. I think we can't rejoin the EU at the moment. Big changes are needed. It could be something in the future, but for now, it's a failing project in my view. Richard spoke a little bit about the financial aspects of it. The UK has always contributed significantly more to the EU than it got back, which is surprising for many people. Some data on this just to back up the claim. It's from the House of Commons Library. In 2019, we made a contribution of £14.4 billion to the EU. We got £5 billion back. That obviously doesn't include all of the financial and the business advantages of being in the EU. Of course, there are more there, but the UK did give a lot more money to the European Union than it got back. And when you think about some of the highest levels of poverty that we have in this country, we have some people below the breadline. The use of food banks are absolutely rocketing. And the fact that we just constantly gave so much money away, I just don't see how we could sign up to that again and join that system again. And I think it made a lot of people angry, and it's not something that people want in this country. Just to kind of round up some of my points, I think it's important to say a little bit about my own relationship with the EU. So I am a British and Irish citizen, so I do still have my links to the EU. That's from my family side. I voted to remain in the 2016 referendum. I genuinely believed it was the right decision at the time, and I genuinely believe that the UK could do more good to change the EU within that rather than being outside of it. I've also lived abroad. I've lived in 2 different EU countries, also obviously in the UK where I'm from. So I've got a good experience of what it's like and, quite frankly, enjoyed those benefits of it. But I just cannot advocate, despite all that, to rejoin a union that is in crisis, that in my view doesn't care or has shown little effort to connect with some of the communities that really need its help the most, that has pandered to the middle class and offered them things which other people haven't. The EU has divided this country, not just because of how we feel about it, but because of its own actions. And I think for that reason, it's utterly not the right time to rejoin the EU, and we're a long way from ever being at that point. And that's my opening statement.
Terrific. 7.5 minutes you got in there, Declan. Okay, well, thank you very much for those spirited opening statements. We're now going to move on to the moderated discussion part of this debate, though I hope I don't have to do much moderating. I'll be clear there. Hopefully you won't be hearing too much from me. I'll only jump in if things are getting uncivil, but from the tone of discussion so far, I don't think that's going to be coming. So, who wants to kick things going?
I'm easy. I went first, so if you want to go first this time, Declan.
Yeah, a couple of things that I'm really interested in. I mean, you spoke about human rights a little bit in your opening statement, and I think that's a really important point to touch on. It's worth noting that the European Convention on Human Rights isn't tied to the EU. It's something which many countries are part of, and it's a fundamental part of Britain. When you look at the human rights record of some European Union countries, I think there is a lot to be desired. We often read in the newspapers, and it's something I've covered myself extensively for Redaction Report, about some of the horrific events happening in Hungary at the moment for the LGBTQ plus community. It's a community which is, quite frankly, it's being targeted on the highest level. People are having laws and rights stripped away, and this is a full EU member. And this has been allowed to go on for a long time, and I think it's quite frankly unacceptable, and I think we all probably agree on that. So I mean, for me, how do you respond to that, Richard? The fact that
Yeah,
you know,
now it's a very good point that you raised, and I'm glad that you raise it. First of all, I think what we need to do is we need to differentiate between the EU and the von der Leyen administration of the EU, the latter of which I have a lot of criticisms. It would be like, for example, saying, well, you're not British if you don't support the Boris Johnson government. We have to separate between the two. And I have many, many criticisms of that administration. And it's not just Hungary, it's what's going on in Poland at the moment with the LGBT-free towns. This is a disgrace, and it's something that the EU should be acting far, far harsher on. And this is down to the administration and a pathetic lack of action. The one thing I will say, though, is no one in the EU does disagree that these are EU values that need to be upheld. The other point that you made about the UK being part of a wider agreement, yeah, we haven't left the European Court on Human Rights, which I'm really, really glad of. But what we're now talking about doing with the Human Rights Act looks like undermining the very position that we encourage people to take by being part of the European Council beyond the EU in the first place. So I agree with you entirely. What the EU are doing is not good enough at the moment. And quite frankly, I'd like to get straight onto my MEP to get them to do something. But I can't because my MEP has been taken away from me. So.
But I mean, how could you want to rejoin them if so little is being done? Because that really bothers me, the fact that there is so little action has been done. And I think, you know, it was been going for so long. Even when we were part of the EU, that problem was there and little was done. I know obviously it's become more profile in the last few years. I think that's very true to say as well. It's had a lot more media coverage, but it just seems naive to me to go, you know, to want to join something like that, where, you know, if we perhaps have issues in the future in this country, I really hope we don't with things like that, but are the EU going to do anything for us? Are they going to do anything, you know, what's going on in Poland too? I just find it, for me, that's an uncomfortable position. I don't know how you feel about it.
I don't actually understand why more action is not being taken, particularly against these Polish LGBT-free cities, because to me, it seems to undermine exactly what is part of the 54 articles, the right to a private life, the right to your own beliefs, the right to live your life the way you want to do. This is fundamental to the EU's central charter. And this, as I say, is one of the big criticisms I have of the von der Leyen administration. But as I say, to my mind, this is about arguing for the EU to do more action, not to dismantle the EU. Without the EU's influence on Poland, I think life would be a lot worse for the LGBTQIA community living in Poland at the moment. And don't get me wrong, as a gay man living in London, I have been very aware of what a privileged position I have been in. It's a long way from when I was a scrawny teenage working class gay lad in a city surrounded by a group of people telling me I shouldn't be there. And I appreciate the protection and rights I have in London, but these are very real protections that are not extended to people worldwide. Now, it is good that our government so far has not reneged on its commitment to LGBTQ rights, although I have to say, some of the issues in terms of funding of the education in schools of this country, removing or encouraging people like the Stonewall Project to be removed from organisations, I find very, very disturbing. Now, it is not on the level of what Hungary and Poland are doing at the moment, but it is certainly something that gives me great concern. And I'll be honest with you, I would feel far more protected if I knew that there were so many more layers of protection there. One of the interesting things I did find in some of the recent elections was talking to some of the other parties standing, and you might remember we stood in Batley and Spen recently, and it gave me a good chance to talk to the Yorkshire Party. Now, you might think, well, what on earth do you have in common with the Yorkshire Party? But when you bore down into it, I realised that what they were concerned was the power grab where Westminster decided everything over our lives. And that's what I was concerned about as well. Now, we have, in my view, an extreme hard right government in place now that is going to try and roll back these protections. And having the European Union's membership as one of the balls in our court, knowing that we cannot go too far without violating our European membership, was something I used to take great comfort from. But I acknowledge the points that you make. What Hungary and Poland are getting away with at the moment is disturbing. And it's something that needs to be addressed on a Commission level.
Yeah, it's something which I agree with you. I think I think, yeah, it's uncomfortable for a lot of people to look at that happening, and you know, very little going on, and it's surprising too, because I think a lot of people on the Remain side, or the Rejoin side now, I suppose, as it is, would want to see more done on that, as you've mentioned yourself. I would as well, but yeah, it's a bad part of the EU, and it's something which I think is
well, it's a bad part of the current administration of the EU. The Erasmus scheme does not discriminate against gay people in Poland. The common market does not deny goods to gay people in Hungary. It is the current administration's lack of action on this issue which is the disturbing thing. And as I say, I would not be voting for. If I still had a vote in EU elections, I would not be voting for an MEP that was going to support the faction in the European Parliament that was going to vote for this commission to be reappointed.
You mentioned the Erasmus scheme. I wanted to talk about that because it's something I touched a little bit in my statement about how I genuinely believe I think the EU panders to the middle classes more than the working class in this country, and I think the Erasmus scheme is a classic example of that, really. I remember when I was at university, I was interested in the Erasmus scheme, and it's brilliant in the fact that it doesn't cost that much money, but there still is a price to it. It's not completely free. So when I went, we had to pay. It was a few thousand, I think, for accommodation you had to pay when you go over there. Whereas over here in the UK, to study here, that was part of my student loan, so it never came out of my own pocket. So what you tended to see was the people who went to Erasmus tended to be people who perhaps their parents could chuck them that money, or they have it in a family savings account or something like that. So I think parts of the EU, like Erasmus, genuinely did focus on the middle class. You look at parts of the country that voted to remain. Lots of those are the metropolitan areas, central London, central Manchester, where I'm based at the moment. That divide there, which is in Britain, also kind of spilled over to the EU. So I don't know. Do you sense that too? Do you not sense that the EU is something which just sort of seems to benefit those who can afford it, really, rather than everyone?
No, I don't. I have very much perceived. Let's be honest. I would probably be counted as a middle class person. I think that's fair to say. I perceive most of the resources that the EU pushes into various development regions to be trying to assist business and commerce in the most deprived areas of Europe. That's how I have perceived it in the past, and certainly the evidence I've seen in terms of talking to areas around the London mayoral campaign where they benefited from EU development grants very much supported that view. It surprises me what you say about the Erasmus scheme. I've not heard anyone suggesting that they've not been on the Erasmus scheme because any finance was actually a barrier to that. But what I would say is, even if that was the case, isn't it better to have it exist than not exist? Isn't it better to try and make sure that that sort of thing is in place and then concentrate on giving the financial support to anyone who is having difficulty in getting onto it? Now, in my day, there was this wonderful socialist woman, I can't remember her name, blonde hair, lovely person, gave us all free grants to go to university, no matter what your background was, and supported that level of education. It has been the British state that has eroded that particular privilege over the years, so that now we are in a position where, even with the best will in the world, you say there, for example, I have a student loan, but that is a bit of debt that is a barrier to many people who don't actually realise the terms of paying back that loan are put off because they think it's going to be a big barrier to them even getting a job going forward. And I would argue that that is probably a bigger barrier to entry than the bursaries, the amounts put on the Erasmus scheme to enter.
Yeah, I take that point. Yeah, I think what we've done in this country with education has been shocking over the last, say, 20 years. The way we've sort of punished young people to basically add that tax to them. It's essentially a tax, the student loan now, to earn more money back. But again, being part of the EU never solved that issue for us. I was part of the first cohort actually in 2012 to pay the higher £9,000 fees, unfortunately, which will always be with me.
Yes,
I'm
guessing it'll be a long time till you vote Liberal Democrat.
Indeed, and it was never something that the EU could help for me. So I just always felt that despite the fact that Erasmus is there and there are brilliant opportunities to study around in the EU, but where I went to school, going to university was a big achievement, and it was never on my mind, and I think most of the people I went to school with, to study abroad, really, to study in another country. And again, I can just imagine that if you're perhaps from if you're from a better background, maybe if you go to a school which maybe encourages you to think about studying abroad, because it is cheap to study abroad in the EU, if when we had that right, then again, great for you, but it just wasn't available to so many people, and I think that's why we see lots of working class people, particularly against the European Union.
I think you make a valid point there, because in actual fact, I would echo that experience from my days at university, which is a lot longer than that ago. But again, I went to university from a background of a family that no one had gone to university from before. And to me, it was just being at university. It never even occurred to me to think about going abroad. For me, Norwich, where I studied, was the biggest city I'd ever seen in my life, and the peak of my ambitions at that particular stage. And I met people there who were doing a year out abroad in the third year, and it's just the sort of thing that was never. No one ever sat down with me and said, "Well, why don't you consider doing this? What that would bring to your life." But this is a weakness of our education system, not making sure that the availability of opportunities is clearly communicated to those who can best benefit from them. And I say that with no disrespect for the teachers who work so hard in the less funded schools to try and give people an education. But I think you're right. There's almost this, well, you're never going to go anyway, so why should we bother? And that's a problem on an EU level, on a UK level, on a local authority level, on a cultural level, in terms of the opportunities that we make available to the young people of our country.
Yeah, I want to see what I've got to get your opinion on the democratic view as well.
On
the democratic side of it. So, for example, I live in the north. I'm from the north, and I know people who voted leave, and they're very passionate that they did. They're very proud that they did, and they would be very, very angry at any suggestion that we rejoin. And do you know what? I get where they're coming from. Yeah. I don't agree with them, but I get where they're coming from. And I think if I had voted leave and someone was advocating to rejoin the EU a couple of years after, I think I would also be upset about that. So, I mean, how do you respond to that?
Well, I have to say that was the first thing on my list when I was going to come back at you to address. You mentioned very much about how we had a democratic vote 5 years ago in order to leave the EU. Now, what I would say is every single thing that could possibly have happened as a result of that vote has happened. We've left the EU, we've left the common market, we've left the customs union, we have left the Erasmus scheme, we've left various projects that we're involved in. For a group of people who got 52% of the vote, that group have got several 100% of what was actually promised by the Leave campaign when at the start, including things that we were told would never actually happen. So the first thing I would say to that is let's put aside the conduct of the vote, first of all, and let's just talk about the mandate. 23rd of June 2016 was the mandate. 5 years after that was a few weeks ago. As far as I'm concerned, everything that was required to be delivered in that 5 year period has been delivered. And so for those people saying, well, we have to have Brexit and see what it's like, we've had Brexit. We've seen what it's like. If you now say we can't have a second debate on this based on what we've seen from the first debate, then I would put it to you that it's that side that's now being undemocratic in this particular debate.
Yeah, I mean, don't you think this vote is different though in a way? Like I take your point that I think a general election we expect to have it regularly because it's good to for all the reasons that it's good to know who's running in the country. It's good to hold them to account. The Brexit referendum feels to me something akin to the Scottish independence referendum in the way that it's a vote which we make. And then we're not going to make it every 5 years. We talk about Brexit and, we had one in 2016. The last one, I believe, was 1974. Maybe James, you might need to just check that. But I believe that was when the last vote was, to be part of the common market as it was then. So it's not something which we should have every 5 years. There's so much going on. It's voters are going to be fatigued. People are fed up of it. People are fed up of talking about Brexit. People just want to see.
You're sorry, but you're saying, oh, people don't want to discuss an issue, so we shouldn't discuss it. Oh, if people are bored with an issue, it's not important. That's not how life works. Some of the most annoying things in our society are really boring to talk about, but it's a fundamental failure of our duty as democratic citizens if we do not seize the nettle and make sure we take a view on that. So, sorry, I interrupted you there. But
no, it's okay. It's okay. But yeah, no. But yeah, I think people are fed up of it. I think we need more time to see how it plays out. 5 years is a long time, but in terms of when the actual Brexit agreement came into force, it wasn't that long ago. So I think the effects of it, the full effects of it, we're still waiting to see. There's a lot that we need to find out. There's a lot, to be honest, there's a lot that's still up in the air. But for me, this is by no means a vote as akin to a general election where we need to have it every 5 years or so. It would be, quite frankly, I think, exhausting to have that debate every 5 years. I think people would just get, even more fed up with the political system. I think they've had their vote. That they voted to leave. A majority of people in this country voted to leave, and we need to now follow through with that. And I think rejoining right now, 5 years after that vote, is just way too soon.
Well, let's go back to the previous vote then, the one, I think it was 75, but I'm not sure. I seem to remember the majority was around about 66 to 34 in that stage, so a much, much bigger majority. And yet in 1977, we already had anti-EU candidates standing in by-elections. So I see that there's no lesson from history that I have to take in terms of when we can start actually standing up and saying, you know what, we don't like this, we want it reversed. To me, I think we've had 5 years of absolute nonsense in terms of the debate, and I'm not putting that on one side or the other. The quality of the discussion since the referendum in terms of administering it, Theresa May's pathetic administration followed by Boris Johnson's disastrous approach to the whole situation, to me is a failure of democratic debate. And I think it's high time we did stand up and have that democratic debate again. You know what? At the end of the day, oh, sorry, you want to come in, James?
I was just going to say, let's begin to wrap up this section of the discussion, and we'll come on to the Q&A in a moment.
Oh, okay, then I'll just quickly check my list of points I was making.
A wrap up speech each now.
Oh, okay.
After you, Richard.
You going to go first, Declan?
You can go first, Richard. Go for it.
Okay, well, just to sort of sum up, and I'll do this sort of in responding to many of the points raised in Declan's speech there. Declan has raised some real issues, some real problematic issues of the way our country is governed and organised, many of which are absolutely nothing to do with our EU membership. Now, in terms of education of the access and rights that people once had within the EU, that I agree. There was a very, very poor job done on explaining to those most in need in our society of how the EU would be a benefit to us. I would utterly dispute that we paid more into the EU than we got out, because in terms of what we got out of it, in terms of the faultless supply lines, getting food to our supermarkets when we want it, the opportunities to influence the global environmental debate, the opportunities to influence the global human rights debate, all of those things cannot actually be priced in terms of pounds, but I would say they are far, far more than the 9 billion difference quoted between the two fees. And when we have a look at exactly how much money has been wasted on schemes and measures to try and assist the leaving of the EU, it actually in fiscal terms comes to more than we paid in our membership combined over the entire time we are there. So whilst I accept the argument that a much better job could be done in communicating the EU's benefits to those who most need it, I reject the argument that financially we were worse off. We were not. We are financially worse off now, and that will become clearer and clearer as the weeks and months unfold. So I'll wrap up there, James.
Yeah, just to quickly respond then. I'd just like to clarify. So yeah, I never said we were financially worse off, but what I did say was we did pay more into it than we got out of it. That's not including everything, as I mentioned before, the benefits of business and the benefits of travel. But we did, as a fact, pay a lot more into it than we got out of it. So just to first clear that point. And then, yeah, just I suppose to pick up finally about you said that a lot of the things I mentioned weren't to do with the EU. And I think I reject that, because I think when you're a member of a body like the EU, which regulates so much of our life, has so much power over our lives, I think the fact that the EU, the idea that the EU wasn't involved in any of that, just doesn't wash with me. The EU involved in all aspects of our lives, from education, from the democratic system, from most of the laws that we set. It was part of all of that, and I think being out of the EU, Britain has got rid of those now. People voted for that. And we need more time before we even think about rejoining, because we're barely past the 5 years when the vote was 5 years ago. We need more time to see how it plays out.
Terrific. Well, thanks very much for that, again, that lively discussion about the question of rejoining. We're going to move on to the Q&A session now. I'm going to start off with a couple of questions of my own for each of you, and then I'll read some submitted questions. So to start with, I'll just point out a couple of facts I'll pick up. Yes, it was 1975 that was the initial referendum on the common market. And it was, of course, approved by, I've got the figure here, my phone doesn't go into sleep mode, it's 67.23% said yes, and 32.77% said no. So just a quick question for each of you to start with. Richard, you talked about the potential for the UK to be rolling back rights out of the EU. What rights do you expect that to be, and do you have any anything to point to there? And Declan, you talked about everyone's sick of this debate at the moment. When do you think would be a time? Is that quantifiable to start talking about the EU again?
I'm so interested to hear Declan's answer on that. I'm going to pause on mine if that's all right.
Go for it.
When is the time, Declan? What would you say?
That's fine. I'm going to be really vague here, but I'm going to say that I don't think you can quantifiably say now is the right time to talk about it. I think you've got to just judge it on public opinion. I think when you speak to most people now, most people would say, look, we've had enough of Brexit. We've heard about all the debates now. We've been going on about it for so long. We just want a break. We want to talk about something else. We want to focus on other things. I appreciate that's probably not a very helpful answer, considering my point before about, it's too soon to have the debate. But I do genuinely think it is. It's far too soon now to talk about rejoining the EU. I think having the debate is the right thing to do. It should always be there. But actually rejoining and starting that process, it's just far too soon. And as much as I think I admire and appreciate what you're doing, Richard, to bang that drum, because God, there's so many EU citizens in this country and people who are affected by the EU who we need those voices. It's really important that we have those, but it's just not the right time to talk about rejoining. There's still far too much that needs to happen for us to be able to even think about getting to that point.
I should point out that I wasn't sarcastically coughing. I am recovering from a bit of a bug, not COVID, I should clarify, but just for the avoidance of any doubt.
I have to review the tape and see where you coughed there. Sorry, I haven't answered my question. Yes, my big concern is the Human Rights Act. My worry is the statements by you-know-who at the top of our Home Office talking about rolling back the Human Rights Act, various parts of the Human Rights Act, and what we've seen happen in terms of the lack of compassion to migrants trying to get into this country by the most dangerous route possible seriously concerns me for the potential of what this government is going to do. Now, as yet, we do not have any proposals in front of Parliament to repeal the Human Rights Act. I worry that they would be there. If we were a member of the EU, I would be much less worried. So that is where my main concern is on that.
Can I just jump in quickly here, James? It's worth pointing out that the EU's rights, act on migrants and refugees coming into the EU isn't great either. They have a lot of work to do. We look at Italy and Malta, refugees coming from North Africa. Again, I know this because I've covered this for Redaction, but there's some pretty appalling situations going on there. Even migrants being sort of deliberately ignored, turned back. If one of the reasons why you think being part of the EU is because of it enables migrants to come, well, that's a very selective and exclusive club. I think maybe
No, I was just giving the example of the lack of compassion that's being shown by this government to various organisations and individuals, and how I believe that lack of compassion is going to be extended to other areas of society via the Human Rights Act. That is my big concern. Going back to the issue in Europe, you're absolutely right there. And the big sadness for me there is, let's be honest, most people think of Angela Merkel as the de facto leader of the EU. And when she tried giving such extensive welcomes to migrants fleeing from war zones and welcoming them into Germany, the backlash that it caused amongst the most disingenuous groups of people was quite shocking and disappointing. And I think that's sadly a weakness of the human condition, not something that can be put down to any one particular political organisation.
Okay, and just one more question for Declan from me. You mentioned the parliamentary figures about us sending more money to the EU than we get back. But some people might say that's slightly selective reporting, isn't it? There might be other perks that we get aside from the money we send directly. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I just clarify that when I made my statement, I did mention that there are lots of other benefits that we get, such as the business benefits, the benefits of travelling. So, yeah, it's not. I don't believe it's selective reporting because I did reference all those other benefits. Richard also mentioned those in his response as well. But my point was really just to look at the fact that when you talk about just hard cash, the UK did give a lot more money to the EU, and that's just the fact. We gave a lot more hard cash. We got a lot less back in terms of money. Obviously, in terms of other things, of course, there's a lot more there. But just on monetary terms, I think that's something that's worth mentioning in this debate.
Well, whilst I wouldn't dispute the accuracy of what you said, Declan, I would dispute its content. It's like me saying, oh, I pay Netflix $13.99 a month. What do they ever pay me? Not a penny. I just have all this package of infinite viewing that I've got in front of me. Where's the cash? And it does ignore all of those non-tangible benefits, which we are now seeing in terms. There are certain things that weren't quantified before. And I think many of us have had the experience of packages arriving suddenly with big extra tax bills on top of them from the EU, things that we didn't have before. So it's so hard to quantify the intangible benefits there. But I would certainly passionately argue they were more than the difference between the fees.
And that's a valid point, and I take that point. But again, it comes back to the point I made earlier that's great if you are able to access those benefits, if you are able to travel to all of those countries and live there, and if you're able to start a business that enjoys that tax rate. If you're not, which many people in this country aren't, why does it benefit you? That would be my question. And I don't think it does a lot of people in this country.
And of course, one more question before I get on to audience questions for Richard is, obviously you mentioned the human. What your reference of human rights record with this government may be down the line. If we were to rejoin the EU, though, and we had a government like that, would this be any more beneficial to, addressing like Orban's Hungary or the law and justice regime in Poland?
Yeah, that would depend on the administration that's heading the EU at the time. And okay, I'm going to be fair. Ursula von der Leyen, let's be honest, has had a lot on her plate since, coming into office and having the COVID crisis basically start on day one that you're there. Yes, I accept that it's not been the main focus of her administration, but somebody somewhere on the Commission should be taking a far harder line to this. And I would hope the European Parliament are going to be scrutinising the work of the Commission very, very closely on this. And this is why I'm frustrated, because if we were still in the EU, I would be writing to my MEP and of course that's the great thing about the way we elected MEPs. You didn't just have to have a Conservative MEP in your area. We elected using a far more democratic system, so you could always pick the MEP in your area that you thought would be most sympathetic to your views to approach. Obviously in the UK we don't have that. If you're in a Tory constituency, that's it, you've got a Tory MP, like it or lump it.
Okay, let's bring in a few audience questions now. It's a shame we couldn't do this live in the end. I was looking into that, but hopefully for some of our future debates, we might be able to do that. But I did put out an appeal for audience questions, and I've got a few here. John Thomas asks the panel, do you think many people were given full facts before they decided which way to vote in the referendum?
Which of us is going to go first on that one?
Take a pick.
I'll jump in. No, I don't think they were. I only recently listened to the Dominic Cummings interview with Laura Kuenssberg from the BBC. I'm sure you've seen it as well, which outlined a lot of the behaviour that was going on around the referendum. The fact that they were selective with some of the figures quoted. We've all seen the 350 million on the bus, which is now etched into our memories. To be quite honest, I think both sides had no idea whether it was, what the strength of their argument was. The Remain side had a weak argument. They weren't cutting through to people. It was distant. It was cold. It just wasn't good enough. The Leave side were saying things that were kind of partially true, but not quite the truth, because it was an emotive argument to win people over. I think both sides utterly let the public down and led to this situation, which is a great shame. Because that, as I said, I did vote to Remain. I think that ultimately was the right decision, personally, but we're here now, aren't we?
Yes, we are. I do totally agree, and I think sometimes we look back on things like this with selective hindsight memory, because if I'm honest, when I saw the claims of 350 million on a bus and the leaflet come through my door talking about Turkey joining the EU, I just laughed, because I thought, this is so obviously a lie. People aren't going to get fooled by this. But the odd thing is, I don't know if you remember the 2011 referendum and how that was swung. But in the 2011 referendum, we suddenly had a last minute claim of, I think it was something like 50 million's going to be squandered on moving to this area. And it swung people. And I think people thought, oh, that's a good tactic. Let's find a dodgy number, throw it at people, and they'll believe it. And I think there has to be responsibility on all sides here. The Leave campaign were disingenuous, dishonest, and overspent. The Remain campaign was weak, smug, complacent, because, let's be honest, we thought our arguments were so obvious. And the general public did not do their due diligence in researching as much as they should have done on that. Now, this to me is a responsibility of being part of a democratic society. It's tripartite in something like this. You have the two sides of the debate. There is also a responsibility on the individuals to make sure they are informed and ready to go into the polling booth on that particular day. And I hope all sides learn for the future on that, particularly the politicians.
Just to pick you up on that a bit, that's a strong statement about the general public. I agree with the sentiment that people should be informed, but I almost felt a little bit like it was almost kind of putting the blame on them a little bit.
Well, us, not them, us.
Yeah, so because it's interesting, because that's been one of the big things as part of this, is that kind of us and them thing, isn't it? That people say, well, those who voted to Remain was the kind of the people who maybe enjoyed the benefits of it, who were maybe a little bit better off and enjoying those benefits. And people who didn't were kind of pushed aside and, sometimes called stupid, and they don't understand. So I know that's not the point you're making, but
you're right. And you're right to pick me up on that to clarify it. So let me be very clear on this. I don't think people on both sides of the debate, and I include myself on that, did enough research before going into that poll. My vote, although I stick by it now, my vote was probably more about emotion than it was about facts and weighing up the arguments. And I can blame both sides of the debate for the appalling facts that were put before us, but at the end of the day, it was my responsibility as someone going into the polling booth to do my research properly. And I've spoken to so many people on both sides who now I've spoken to more people who said they voted Leave that would now Remain, but I've spoken to Remain voters who said they would now have voted Leave as well. And I think all of us, in retrospect, are shocked by what we did not know. Now, we can divide that into two things. What we could not have known at the time, and of course, the interview with Cummings was very revealing on that, and what we could have found out with a little bit more research on our part. And I have to say, for a democratic society to be successful, there has to be a responsibility on the voters to use the information they've got and process that information wisely.
Can I just jump in a second? Richard, when you say the Vote Leave campaign overspent, I assume you're referring to when it was deemed by the Electoral Commission that the Vote Leave campaign was in breach of electoral law and was fined £61,000 for exceeding its spending limits. Is that correct?
That is indeed the case. And of course, the irony is, if it had been a binding referendum rather than an advisory one, then the referendum would have been declared invalid. And indeed, I remember vaguely from history the 1979 referendum on Scottish independence, where Scotland actually voted, I seem to recall, for, no, it was devolution, not independence. Scotland voted for devolution, but it was overturned due to various irregularities. So it's just one of those bad lucks of fate, I guess.
Just one thing I want to quickly come back to about this sort of general public thing. It really just makes me think that, if we had another EU referendum, if you think people didn't have enough time to do all the research that they needed to do then, what makes you think they would do it now after having talked about this endlessly for 5 years? I think people would
exactly that, Declan. If you were to go back in time to 2015, which I would argue Britain was a paradise on earth in comparison in 2015, and you asked people how interested were they in the EU, I think most people would say not at all. The amount of information that has come out since in all public forums for people to absorb, I think virtually every single person who voted in that referendum is instantly far better equipped to make their decision now than they were 5 years ago.
Okay, just take another question from the public. Sorry to our listeners if I don't get the chance to read everyone's questions out. Obviously, we're constrained by time. Excuse me. An anonymous asker asks, given
anonymous asker, that's a worry.
Yes. Given that there are a lot more leave voting constituencies, how can a party expect to win an election on a rejoin platform?
I think that one's for Richard.
If anyone's expecting me to win an election, I think they might have misunderstood fundamentally quite a lot of what's going on at the moment. Let's be frank. There are quite a lot of leave vote. Many of all, we're going to have all the boundary changes by the next election. So we've now got 600 rather than 650 seats. And I don't know if anyone's got their head round yet how many of those 600 would notionally be leave seats and how many would notionally be remain seats. But given that, I would argue that any politician of conviction, if they believe in something as central as rejoining the EU and they stand at a constituency saying they're a Leave supporter or vice versa, that is fundamentally dishonourable on them, and I would be shocked. But I can confirm that I'm not expecting to win a majority at the next election or even a single seat and not even a single deposit. So that's of academic interest.
Yeah, just
do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, just a little bit. I think it's going to be very difficult for anyone. I really can't imagine, politicians coming around the north and telling people to rejoin the EU. I think the response would be quite very strong, to put it one way. And I think people
sorry to interrupt you, Declan, but I have to say, going around the streets of Batley and Spen and talking to people on that, people were very receptive, in inverted commas, both positive and negative. I didn't find a single person, well, no, I found two people out of all the people I talked to who did not want to engage in the issue. So, and I didn't sense any anger. There were people who were still certain in their view, but I don't detect, I'm not prepared to have this debate and how dare you.
I think it's there. I think a lot of people are fed up of it. I think a lot of people would be a little bit insulted, for someone coming there and telling them, this is what to do. And I think that's part of the issue as well, because for so long, the Remain side was almost telling people what to do. It was all, you mentioned it yourself. It was assumed that the arguments were better, and I think it's almost like an insult to people's intelligence. And I think that was part of the issue. Right. And I think coming back to that, if anyone tried to do that again, it would just cost them big time. I think we've seen with the Labour Party how their stance on the EU, which has shifted a lot. It's hard to fix that down, but how that's cost them in elections as well. They've suffered. They've lost seats in places like Stoke-on-Trent. So I think it's going to be really difficult for Labour and parties like in the future on this debate.
Yes, just to bring back Richard's point about the 1979 devolution referendum in Scotland. Indeed, in that, 51.62% voted yes to the proposals, but the conditions, not all the conditions of the Act were met, so it did not pass. So, slightly different scenario there, but point still taken. Okay, another question, another anonymous question. Would the uncertainty cause more economic damage if the debate were reopened?
I don't think it is possible to cause more economic damage due to uncertainty than the situation we're in at the moment. And I'm not saying that as a flippant point. No one has a clue what the eventual trade deals are going to be between the UK and the rest of the world. Many people in many key industries don't have a clue even as to whether their next contract is coming from, where their next supply chain link is coming from. So no, I cannot say I agree with that because I cannot think of any scenario where we could have a worse economic situation in terms of the infrastructure rather than the statistics than we've got at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not an economist. It's hard for me to fully answer that. But what I do think would happen is I think there is a lot of uncertainty now, as people are still getting used to trading now with different countries. You know, we're getting new trade deals all the time, so it's certainly uncertain. But I think looking to rejoin the EU now, I think would create somehow even more uncertainty, because then I think people would think, well, I'm getting used to the new system we're doing it, and now you're telling me that's the wrong system as well. Now I have to change it again. I think people will just lose the plot a bit and be like, well, what's going on? And so, you know, I think we're just about getting used to how it works now. There is a lot of uncertainty. You know, arguing to change that again now after only a few years.
You say that, but we're not even out of the transitional arrangements yet. The number of deadlines we still have where various things will change. We have another big one at the end of the year when we lose the CE designation on so many of the goods. I have no idea what's going to happen then. And we have the Northern Ireland Protocol. Who knows how that's going to work out at the moment? So to say people are getting used to it, I think all people are getting used to is chaos at the moment. And I hope people don't get used to loving chaos, because I think getting back to the EU would reduce that. Yeah,
maybe just to clarify, yeah, I take your point on that, but I think we need to work towards getting one system. I think we need to, you know, we voted to leave the EU. We're out now. That was the decision. We need to work on getting that to work. It's taking some time, of course it is. It's a massive deal, but changing it right now wouldn't be the right thing to do, like halfway through that process.
Okay, let's just have one more question now, because I noticed the clock is ticking. I'll pick this one, another anonymous one. What is the panel's view on future EU expansion?
Wow, big question.
It is. Do you want to go first, Declan?
Yeah, I mean, I have a point to make about this. I mean, again, it comes back to something Richard mentioned at the start about the peace project of the EU, the fact that it, you know, has prevented war in Europe for a long time, which in some way is true. But then I think when you also think about the situation in Ukraine at the moment, a country which, again, is divided over the EU. Many people want to join. Some people in parts of it would prefer the country to be closer to Russia. It's a very tense situation. It's violent there, and the EU seems to have done very little in terms of offer support to that. And you know, that's not only the EU. So is the United States. So is the UK. So is, you know, the big powers of the world. But the EU, the fact that it's a neighbouring country of Ukraine, you know, after Ukraine, then Russia has a border with the EU. It has one anyway, of course, not just Ukraine, but you know, these issues impact the EU. So I think when you think about future states, you know, countries like Ukraine, countries like Turkey, who again, you know, Turkey share the border near Syria, where there's still a lot of conflict and damage going on there. I think these are big questions, and I think a lot of EU members would be very uncertain about those countries joining. You know, the economic impact it would have, the impact of immigration, and I think British people especially would be very very unsympathetic to those countries joining, probably, I can imagine. So yeah, it's a huge one, and I think that is possibly going to hurt the EU quite a lot. I don't know, what do you make of it, Richard?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the example of Ukraine, actually, because I go back to the very first point I made. Our problems are global in nature, not local. And the age of small nations having big influence on the world is over. Let's remind ourselves about what Ukraine did when it left the Soviet Union. Ukraine unilaterally, as a gesture of world peace, gave up nuclear weapons because it didn't want to be part of it, because it felt safe and secure in amongst the blocs it had. What happened? A nuclear power invades and annexes part of its territory. And another power next door, thinking about the conflict that they're going to have if they intervene, doesn't do enough. And it's not just the power next door, you're right, it's the US as well. And this to me suggests that if you are going to be part of a small nation in a very angry, vicious world dominated by 4 major powers who care more about each other, then you are best off trying to ally with one of those powers. Now, the EU has brought amazing benefits to some of the new accession countries. The person I live with comes from the former Yugoslavia, and the benefits it's brought to countries like Croatia and that sort of area of the world. And I really hope that countries like Serbia are eventually able to accede into the group. But this is probably what the world of the future is going to be. We cannot exist as tiny little tribes in our islands, in our little enclaves. We have to come together globally. And I think, quite frankly, the thing that appalls me most about all four of the major powers is how they actively exploit the little countries around them for their economic benefit. So would I like the EU to get back to opening up its doors and enlarging? Yes, I would, but I don't think it's going to happen in the near future, because some of the structural issues that Declan identified, I think, are going to be dominant on the minds at the moment.
Can I try and pin you down on this a little bit more?
Go on.
Countries like Ukraine and Turkey, would you be open for them to joining in the situation as it is now?
As it is now, I would love Turkey to join as it is now, because for Turkey to join, it would have to agree to all the fundamental human rights that are currently being denied to so many people in that area. My parents used to holiday regularly in Turkey and celebrate what a wonderful open society it was, and how the current regime has undermined so many basic freedoms. I would like to see the same Charter of Rights that you can benefit from in Belgium, in Finland, in Estonia, extended to the people of Turkey. Yes, I would. Obviously, economically, Turkey's already linked in terms of the customs union, but I think it would do so much useful good for that region of the world for it to join.
Well,
I think Mr. Erdogan will disagree with me on that. Sorry.
No worries at all. Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for today, everyone. But thank you so much for tuning in. Like I say, we'll have more debates on the horizon, so please keep an eye out for that. Like and subscribe, and let us know what you think in the comments section. Which side are you swung towards? Do you support rejoining the EU, or are you against it? And for international viewers, let us know your thoughts as well. But until then, it's goodbye from me. Thank you to Declan. Thank you to Richard, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you for joining.
Thanks so much.